It's about a day later, and as you can see, I got everything cleaned up. I cleaned the oil that dribbled out off my corrugated. I wiped down my tools and put them away. I like to start every day with my tools cleaned and put away, usually, and then I take them back out as I need them, so I got a nice clean workspace. The parts that I removed in the previous video are bagged and tagged, labeled, all put away right now for use later on when we get to the reassembly and we get to them. The piece of corrugated right here that the engine is mounted on, that the oil dribbled on, I'm not going to change that right now. I'm going to leave that alone because there's probably more residual oil inside of here, and I split these cases. And once I've got all the disassembly done and the cleaning done, then I'll put a new piece of corrugated or cardboard down as I start putting everything back together. I did make a decision here regarding the oil pump. I've never seen a design quite like this before. This oil line right here, which of course mounts the oil pump, which is on the opposite side of the engine back over here. There's quite a labyrinth of passages through these cases that this oil line has to snake through to come out over here. And I'm concerned if I try to flex this too much to work it back through, no matter which side I work from, I'm going to damage or crack this plastic line. And certainly I don't want to do that because you can't get these from Suzuki anymore, so I'd have to go to NOS, either find NOS, which is not likely, or good used. So I'm going to avoid all that right now. I think that when I split the cases here, at that point I can probably get the oil line fished out and get the oil pump removed, but for now I'm going to leave it mounted. That is, the oil pump is reattached temporarily to the left side of the engine, and when I split it, the cases that is, I will then see about removing the oil line. Again, I've never seen it really done this way in all the previous engines I've ever worked on. This oil line could be removed, but I'm just concerned about the design of this one, and I don't want to damage it. We are going to focus at this point on removing all of these assemblies from the right side of the engine: clutch pack, kickstarter mechanism here. We've got the shift mechanism behind the clutch pack. This is the drive pinion right here I'm pointing to with my left index finger. This is attached right to the end of the crankshaft. And of course, right here, this aluminum plate. Behind this is the rotary valve itself, with a seal that you probably can't see very well right here. That seal, of course, will likely be replaced later. I've also removed the dowel pins. There are 3 dowel pins on this side of the engine that locates that large case that fits over. One here, and I think there's one back over here. And on the left side, there was 1 or 2, if I recall. But I removed all those dowel pins. 2 of them dropped right out. The other couple I had to work out because I didn't want to drop them and lose them in the process of manhandling this engine around. So we're going to start with removal of the clutch package. I'm going to remove these pins right here. You can see these 5 pins that hold this cover on. Then I'll remove all the clutch plates so that I can get at the nut back there with the lock. There's probably a lock washer, at least according to documentation, there's a lock washer. Get this off out of the way. Probably then remove the pinion gear, nut and gear right here. And then we'll just continue to work our way in. I'm going to attempt to leave the engine in this position right here so that you can see what I'm doing as I pull these pins and lift these plates out. I might have to reposition it just a little bit, but I'll do my best to try to stay out of the way. If I have to shift to an overhead shot and tilt the engine up, I will do so. But we'll see. We'll try this first, this view, and I will work from this position so that you can get a perspective of what I'm doing. So allow me to get some tools organized here, and we'll start pulling these pins. And they're just held in with pressure from the springs. That's what you see right here. These springs are holding those pins in. And we'll start working our way in. In order to get these pins out, I'm going to use 2 different tools. I'm going to use a hook, something like that. And I'm going to hook into those springs and pull the tension off the spring, and then I'm going to use a magnet. I'm going to attempt to use a magnet to pull, just remove those pins that are holding the springs. Most manufacturers use a series of bolts in here that go into a tower or a pedestal that comes up from the back side of the plate or the clutch basket. Suzuki, on some of their bikes anyway, uses this pin arrangement. I don't think one is any better than the other. They both seem to work okay. That's just the way Suzuki happened to design these small engines. So let's go ahead and get these, see if we can't get these pins out. I have two different types of tools here, or two different shapes. Actually, I got even more than that. You can see what I have here. I'll start with this one first, and I'll see if I can't leverage that up just enough to pull that pin out, like that. I'll just set that aside and just release the spring. And I'm going to just work my way around. I've taken a few more photos, just documenting again this stage of where I'm at. I know these, some of them are going to be redundant, but I don't care. So moving on into the clutch. I pulled this faceplate off. As you can see, this just fits on like that. And I'm just going to place it like that, face down. I'm going to keep this clutch pack integrity like you see here. I'll lift this off as a unit in a few minutes. But I'm going to leave it together first because I need to flatten out that washer, lock washer in here, so that I can remove this nut. There's a nut right here. It's a 22 millimeter nut. And I'm going to use the clutch plates, and you can see up here at the top I've got that big screwdriver with the vinyl tubing back in place to prevent the crankshaft from turning. I'm going to hit this nut with my air impact, and try to just break it free. But first I've got to remove the lifter. See that right there? Some people call it a pusher, some call it a lifter. That's pushed through from the opposite side of the case by the clutch mechanism on the left side, which as you pull on the handle, it'll activate the mechanism, push that rod through, pushing against this plate right here, and allows those clutch plates to separate. That's the thinking behind it. So I'm just going to set that aside and leave this here for now. Now I've got to get in here, and you can see the lock tab probably right there. Maybe not, but it's there. You have to take my word for it. Get on my safety glasses here, and we're going to again use a chisel, cold chisel. And I'm going to flatten that tab out. Now that looks like it's probably been messed with before. It doesn't look like a factory bend to me. It looks like somebody might have been in there, but let's see if I can get some light here on it a little bit. See if I can't just flatten that out. That flattened out, or that tab flattened out. It was mangled pretty bad, so I'm thinking someone had been in here before, because that did not look like a factory bend to me. They're usually much more pristine than that. So I've got the crankshaft and everything locked. I'm going to use my impact driver, 22 millimeter, and just spin that nut right out. And then see if we can't get that lock washer off as well. By the way, I am wearing my safety glasses. I don't know if I mentioned that or not. Here we go. You can see there how it was kind of mangled. So now, let me put this aside. Now I can remove the clutch plates, and then I'm going to put the package back. In order to maintain the clutch package integrity, that is just keeping it the way it came apart, because I will inspect this later. That is, I'm not going to do anything with this right now. And you've heard me say before, I don't break everything down to its finest parts. What I try to do is break it down into assemblies. The clutch, this clutch is being one of them. So I'm going to keep the clutch together. Just use some zip ties. I keep a lot of zip ties around. I've got all different sizes and colors of zip ties. So I'm just going to put this back together in approximately the same orientation as it came off. And I'll come back to this later and inspect it, clean it, and then decide what I'm going to do with it in terms of either repair or replace. That is, clean it up, scuff up the plates, replace some of the plates, or replace anything. It would probably be the friction discs for plates. And again, all I'm trying to do right here is just maintain its relative positioning in terms of particularly the plate's orientation this way. I can always look it up later. I mean, it's not that big a deal if this comes apart, but I'll just maintain positioning for now. So after just moving this in and out a little bit, I noticed one of the steel plates right here stayed behind. I think that was from stiction. That is, the oil held it against the inner or outer basket rather right here. So I'll just pull that plate out. And I know that this is the outside of this plate, so that will go like that. And then I'll redo these zip ties in a few minutes. So I've got plenty of those. I'm just going to pull this whole assembly off like that. And you can see there's a bushing right there. Remember, there's a thrust washer that goes here. So what I'm going to do is put this assembly back together like this with the thrust washer in there. And then I'm going to zip tie this all together as well as a unit. So there's a clutch basket or assembly all kept together. Again, that thrust washer that's behind this inner section is still in place. The bushing is still there. I had to use two zip ties together because the loop around is a little bit bigger than the zip ties I wanted to use. But next size up are really long, and I didn't want to waste those, so I just used two of these. So again, this assembly is going to be kept in this condition until I come back to it later on and clean it and inspect it and decide what to do with it. So now you can clearly see all the shift mechanism here, the shift drum, which is up in here, bearing retainer, shifter, or rather kickstarter. That's the input shaft to the transmission. I think the next thing I'm going to do is remove this nut, this pinion nut right here. You see it's similar design to what we just talked about. You've got a lock washer with a nut. And again, I'm going to do the same thing as I've done several times now. I'm just going to lock the connecting rod from turning so the crankshaft doesn't spin, and we'll get this apart. I'm not going to show that. You've seen it already a couple times. We'll come back in a few minutes and pick this up. So I got the nut and the lock washer off the drive pinion. Again, this is the end of the crankshaft. And also there's protrusion here on this washer that fits into this hole. Right here I'm pointing with my pinky in the gear itself, or the pinion, drive pinion. This gear, this pinion comes off, and there should be, yeah, there is a key right there. I don't know if you can see it. It fits into a slot in the end of the crankshaft. That's to lock everything together. That is, this drive pinion or drive gear gets locked to the crankshaft, and then this washer gets locked to the gear. It prevents everything from turning. That's a very critical part of this whole assembly. And I'm going to do is set those aside, and what I'll do is clean those up, these parts up. Let me show them back to you here a second. I will degrease these, they're just oily right now, but I will clean them all up. I'll keep them together for now. Clean them up, and then I'll bag them and label them to keep that set together. Now you can see the cover right here for the, back is quite loose. This is the aluminum cover for the rotary valve. And there's the rotary valve itself right there. So if I pull this out and turn the engine over, you can see, I hope you can see, there's a cutout right from here around to here. There's a cutout. So as the engine turns like that, that's what allows the fuel air charge coming in from the carburetor on the side this way to be inducted into the lower end of the engine. See it right there. And we'll come back to that a little bit later. In fact, I think what I'll do right now is just put this cover back on just to protect the rotary valve, because I'm not really ready to get into that part of it. What we're going to do now is move over into this part of the engine, that is the gear change mechanism, the kickstarter, etc. One thing I didn't mention before is someone has been in here because there's silicone. If you can see it right there in my hand. Someone had applied a relatively thin coating of silicone all the way around. There is actually a gasket too. Pretty sure that's not factory. I've never seen the factory use a silicone-like material. Get that back in shot for you. To attach a gasket. So I think someone has been in here before. I don't know for what purpose. I'm going to go ahead and document this as well, so you just have to bear with me a minute, and we'll come back after I've taken a number of photos of what's going on here so that I can keep it straight later on. I'm going to put everything back together, and then we'll pick it up on the other side. Clearly there's evidence of silicone. Let me just repeat myself. Here it is attached to the spring, this kickstart return spring. You can see bits and pieces of it all over. That's one of the problems I have with silicone. And even though I don't think it was overdone in this case, because sometimes you see it gooped all over everything, silicone is actually a very strong adhesive. And what will happen is it'll want to glue parts together, especially side covers and that kind of thing, where you've got tight mating surfaces. I'm not a huge fan of silicone. It has its uses, but I only use it if I really have to, if it's a dire situation. If it's not generally called for by the manufacturers, I don't use it unless I really have to. So here's all your gear change mechanism in here. We talked about a lot of this already. This is your let me get a tool here. This is part of the kickstart, the return spring. So I studied this. It's fairly simple return spring mechanism. There is a circlip down in here, snap ring, that's holding a plate, which you probably can't see back here, on in place. I think the first thing I'm going to do is use a pair of pliers, needle nose, and pull this end of the spring out of the drilling in the kickstart shaft. There's a hole in there that protruding into. Let's see if we can't just get that out. There's probably tension on the spring like that. Okay. Now I'll see if I can't go in with pliers here, snap ring, pliers. Forgive me if my head gets in the way. I'm trying to not get in the way of your view. There. Okay, now we'll see if we can get this assembly off in one piece. There's that snap ring right there. circlip. Pull this off. Again, I'm going to put this back together with the circlip, and I'm going to zip tie that whole assembly together. So now that really exposes the shift mechanism here. So what I'm going to do now is study the service manual and go through it and make sure I understand the nuances of how this is assembled. It's pretty typical by just looking at it. I don't see anything really unusual about it, but I want to make sure I get it right. And particularly in the positioning of the drum here, the shift drum, etc. So I'm going to study the service manual before I get into this any further. So we're going to call this video a wrap at this point and conclude this particular video, and we'll pick it up on the other side later on when we decide how I'm going to take this shift mechanism apart. Once that's off, bearing retainer, then we'll probably get into the rotary valve assembly. Once that's all done, then I think we're about ready to split the cases. That's going to be it for today's video, folks. Any issues, questions, thoughts, drop me a note. Otherwise, as usual, thanks for watching.